our meeting for this morning. Excellencies, dear colleagues, I am very pleased to welcome you all to this second integration dialogue that I am convening in preparation for the 2021 integration segment of the Economic and Social Council. First, let me begin with a few housekeeping announcements. I would like to inform you that this meeting is being recorded. I will also like to request that all participants keep their microphone muted when you are not speaking. I request the lead agency, the moderator, and the panelists to please keep their camera on throughout the meeting while keeping their microphone off, except when they have the floor. Distinguished participants, dear colleagues, let's go to the topics. Integrated policy frameworks are at the heart of realizing the 2030 agenda. This is not by chance. Integrated strategies and policies are meant to break silos, to generate positive impacts and co-benefits in related sectors, to increase coordination among various actors, and instill multidimensional approaches. These approaches are crucial at a time when we look for sustainable and resilient recovery strategies that also set inclusive and effective paths towards the achievement of the 2030 agenda. We have to face reality, and reality says that no recovery is possible without vaccines for all. This is the shared huge challenge the international community is facing in this very moment. The Economic and Social Council was given the charter mandate to coordinate the work of the UN entire system, including the specialized agents in the economic, social, health, cultural, education, and related matters. ECOSOC has a powerful role which should be used to provide the solutions to the economic, social, health, and related global problems that the Charter talks about. COVID-19 represents one of these compelling global challenges that ECOSOC was created to address. And the UN system has been at the heart of the policy and operational response to COVID-19 and its impacts. ECOSOC's role extends from setting priorities for the global health response and advising on public health measures in countries to leading numerous efforts to deploy, coordinate, analyze, and develop resources, initiatives, and frameworks at the national and the international regional level in order to better respond to the pandemic's impacts and recover in a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient manner. ECOSOC's range of expert work through its functional commissions and expert bodies has also contributed by recommending policy and standards on how best to respond to the pandemic and encourage an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient recovery. It is important for the members of ECOSOC and for the UN to hear to what all these entities have been doing to achieve these goals, how they are integrated their activities. Our second dialogue today will focus on building back better towards inclusive, sustainable, and just economies for recovery, redesigning the contract between people and planet. And I want to express my deep appreciation to the ILO, the International Labour Organization, for being the lead entity for this dialogue to set the stage. In response to the pandemic, many countries, especially large countries, have introduced unprecedented stimulus packages to recover from the pandemic. We must seize the opportunity to recover better by aligning the resources freed through these packages with the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. There we have it. There is the pathway to follow. We need to prioritize economic growth that is inclusive, sustainable, and promotes decent work. Our recovery efforts must also build inclusive social systems and respond to the urgent global threat of climate change, as well as build resilience in all dimensions of sustainable development. Today, we will explore transformative and integrated policies that can help to respond to the crisis in the short term while building a resilient and sustainable recovery from the pandemic. We look forward to hearing country experiences in dealing with the pandemic and climate change. We would also like to hear from you about ways to build a new social contract to help recover better and put countries on track to achieving the SDGs. I only would like to share an example in this regard. In September last year, Mexico issued a groundbreaking 7-year SDG bond for a total value of $890 million. Resources that will be transferred from private funds to finance SDG-oriented programs, and we invited the UNDP to partner to witness with us this initiative, so really verifying that the money of the bond goes to the SDGs program. Considering it was the first sustainable bond, Mexico hopes this experience can be replicated in other countries. And that's what we need when we're talking about recovery, about innovation, about new ideas to find resources. We need to keep in mind that some developing countries are facing major fiscal constraints, not only in stopping the pandemic, but also in responding to its socioeconomic impacts on their people, in particular the most vulnerable. We will also focus on the potential of data and digital technologies for a sustainable recovery, vaccine equity, and accelerated progress towards the SDGs. And we examine how these policy responses intersect with each other, how we create the synergies necessary and or leading to trade-offs that will require tough decisions. Our discussions finally will concretely advance on integrated policy making. We will give practical meaning to this approach, which has come to the forefront with the 2030 Agenda. We can also take inspiration from the Global Sustainable Development Report, which identifies several entry points for integrated policies, such as promoting human well-being and capacities. One thing is clear, and is that we are not doing business as usual anymore, that we need to innovate, and that we have a fantastic opportunity to improve, to break silos, to work differently, to find new solutions. This is what the dialogues are about. Today's panel reflects the richness and diversity of the work of the ECOSOC subsidiary bodies and the UN system. We are also giving a new life to ECOSOC. Let's realize that this is not business as usual. This is not ECOSOC as usual. And I am more than proud that we are doing finally this. I hope that we can pull their policy guidance together in a cohesive whole that would be helpful to countries as they continue to adjust and reshape their responses to the pandemic, and as they debate in the HLPF that is coming next month. Without further delay, I would like to invite our moderator, and I thank you so much, Mr. Volker Turk, Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination of the Executive Office of the Secretary General, to moderate these discussions. I thank you very much, Mr. Turk, especially because you are the lead innovator on policies at the UN, and we thank you very much for that. So here we are. These integrations are basically for people, for your thinking. So I'm very pleased that you are moderating this morning. Thank you so much. You have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vice President of ECOSOC, Querido Juan. I'm very happy to moderate this discussion, and I know we have quite a rich panel ahead of us, and I would like to, especially once we have heard from the panelists, to go to the floor and see what type of comments and ideas are out there, so that we can try to make a virtual world as interactive as possible. And let me just perhaps follow on from you. It's clear that, and it's almost axiomatic to say, that COVID has been the wake-up call, it has been the dress rehearsal, it has been, if you like, the opportunity in the crisis. We see this on so many fronts as we emerge from it. And we also know how bare the fragilities of the world have become, that were pre-existing. We see it, especially as you mentioned, when it comes to the Sustainable Development Agenda and the implementation of it. and some of the temporary setbacks that we have seen when it comes to poverty reduction. I mean, we have Vic van Buren from the ILO. We have seen it, and you will, I'm sure, talk about it on the loss of jobs that we have seen globally, but also when it comes to social protection floors, that where less and less people are able to access them. And most importantly, the staggering number of people who are falling into abject poverty because of the crisis. And we know, and it's important to really emphasize this, the particular gender dimension in all of this, both when it comes to loss of gender equality in the labor market, the whole issue of the care economy, the fact that we have also seen an increase in violence. And as you mentioned, we have, of course, the blueprint. The blueprint is the package. It's the Sustainable Development Goals and the implementation of it. And whenever I personally go back to the SDGs, I always marvel at how comprehensive, how holistic, how interconnected the SDGs have been crafted by member states, and through this interactive process that you have all been engaged with, and including ECOSOC and different parts of the UN system, in order to craft it well. One thing that comes through very clearly is, and I'm very happy from our perspective, that you have put the whole issue of integration on the agenda. It is a very, how should I say, it's one of the priorities of the Secretary General. It has been one of the common threads in his reform efforts. It's extremely important because we know that in order to advance, and as we emerge from the crisis, there needs to be a much stronger integrated analysis and planning, both from the peace and security side, the political aspects of it, but also, as we know, the development side, the humanitarian side, underpinned and infused, of course, by the human rights dimension. So that's very critical, and you have probably seen the SG's, the Secretary General's launch of the Call to Action for Human Rights, which also tries to bring in to the development dimension this very strong human rights focus, but as it's embedded in the humanitarian and in the peace and security response. We have actually just recently commissioned a very in-depth analysis of integration within the UN, both when it comes to peace operations, or where we have integrated missions, but also when it comes to non-mission settings. And we used, and you mentioned innovation, Juan, we used behavioral science as a tool to analyze a little bit better why do we have problems when it comes to integration. And a lot has to do with the culture and the mindset. And I think apart from all the technical work that has to be done, we often don't see colleagues move out of their silos or move out of their comfort zones and really contribute to a country analysis that then can support countries in a crisis situation, or once they emerge from crisis situations, or even in a regular situation. Because of course we know with COVID a lot more countries have felt the particular situation that has affected them and has impacted them. So for us, it's extremely important that we as the system bring together this integrated analysis, the joint planning exercises, while recognizing, of course, the diversity within the system and the comparative advantage of each and every one of the different actors. I think at the member state level, if I just could mention that as well, we are very much looking forward to engaging with societies and with countries on the common agenda that came out of the UN 75 declaration that was adopted by member states last year. With the 12 commitments. It's clear, and you have heard the Secretary General talk about it, at the member state level, we really need to come to terms with what inclusive, networked, and effective multilateralism means. And it goes to the heart of the topics that you within the ECOSOC are discussing, including in relation to the different agencies, funds, and programs. Sorry, that was a bit of a longish introduction. Without further ado, let me give the floor to the lead entity first on this dialogue, and it's Mr. Vic van Buren, the Director of the Enterprise Department of the International Labour Organization. Over to you, Vic.
Thank you very much, and good day to everybody. In 5 minutes, I'm going to try and bake a cake and see what kind of ingredients we need to put into this cake, because it can be somewhat complex. In reacting to the pandemic, governments have pursued the fine balance between health, economic, and social objectives. But this balance has proven to be elusive. The current rollout of vaccines, however, shows a real prospect of exiting the current world of work crisis, and we look forward to this happening. Underpinning these developments is a series of dynamics, all of them rooted in pre-existing labor market problems, which make the most vulnerable and disadvantaged the particular victims of the economic and social crisis. Nowhere has it been more evident than in respect of the world's informal workers, the youth, and the women. Small and medium-sized enterprises have also been unduly affected. In looking to the future, the ILO is focused in particular on the implications of three mega drivers of change in the world of work and the transition processes that arise from them. Firstly, the technological change. Secondly, the environmental sustainability. And thirdly, the demographic shifts. And I'll briefly touch on each of these. By requiring enterprises to have much greater recourse to the alternative work arrangements made possible by technologies, the pandemic is widely understood to have accelerated processes of digitalization of work. But this has not been a general or an even trend, and that's where the challenge lies. The significance of the pandemic for action on climate change is less clear. The brutal interruption of productive activity has logically brought some reduction in carbon emissions, but it is relatively small and moreover seems likely to be short-lived, and that is of concern. The work-related challenges are derived from the very different demographic trends in the world, with aging populations on the one hand and growing youth cohorts on the other. The closure of borders has also seriously impacted the practice and management of migration. The pandemic has not changed the importance and urgency of the multiple imperatives that transformative change already presented for the future of work. They will need to be addressed as integral components of the human-centered recovery. The expansive macroeconomic positions taken have had a crucial role in mitigating the economic and social damage wrought by the pandemic, but the stimulus has been unevenly applied. That may not be surprising, but it has serious consequences. Sustaining otherwise viable enterprises so that they do not fall victim to the conditions imposed on them by the pandemic and measures to contain it is an essential part of safeguarding the integrity of society's productive capacities. Process is as important as content, and it is important that recourse be had to social dialogue not only in moments of acute crisis, but on a permanent basis. I'm now going to look at some of the ingredients that we would see as being important in this integral approach to looking forward to a better future. In looking to inclusive economic growth and employment, I wish to mention the key focus areas that need attention and should be part of a checklist. We need to ensure, firstly, of a broad-based job-rich recovery with decent work opportunities through integrated national employment policy responses. Secondly, we need to promote global solidarity through the support for developing countries. We need to support business continuity and an enabling environment for productivity growth and sustainable enterprises, recognizing the crucial role of the private sector. At the same time, we need to provide incentives to employers to retain workers, even during these difficult times. We need to prioritize action to support young workers and entrepreneurs who are absolutely discouraged at the moment. We need to bring them into the mainstream of our policy making. We need to strengthen investment in lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is a must because it's a changing environment. We need to roster more resilient supply chains and leverage the opportunities of just digital and ecological transitions. And lastly, on this particular point, is to develop approaches to curb the spread of informality, which in the developing economy is becoming worrisome. We need to also look at the protection of workers. We need to provide all workers with adequate protection, including a focus on healthcare and other frontline workers. We need to strengthen occupational safety and health measures and adapt teleworking and other new work arrangements to keep pace with the ever-changing environment. We need to uphold the continued relevance of the employment relationship, which is extremely important. while implementing a transformative agenda for gender equality. And this has been already mentioned in the opening remarks. We need to prevent gender-based violence and harassment and protecting people from it. This is all part of the equation and must not be seen on the periphery. We need to execute across the public and private sectors a transformative agenda for equality, diversity, and inclusion. On universal social protection, we need to achieve universal access to comprehensive and adequate social protection through equitable and sustainable financing, while enhancing access to unemployment protection. We need to reinforce the essential role of the public sector in supporting well-functioning economies and societies. Lastly, I wish to just make a brief comment on the environment, because that is going to be addressed by another speaker. In order to tackle the environmental challenges, we must converge around the same common narrative. Some still consider that we must choose between economic growth and jobs, social justice and environmental sustainability. To the contrary, we have learned as well that there is no necessary trade-off between these dimensions. The pursuit of economic growth can be achieved while ensuring environmental sustainability. The ILO Global Analysis suggests we could generate 24 new million jobs by 2030. There could be a loss of 6 million, but a net gain of 18 million. Just transition processes for all require a lot of ingredients: effective social dialogue, careful planning, coordinated policies, and adequate funding. Thus, we can see there are many ingredients that we need to factor in to a successful and better future for all, which puts into place the human-centered approach. My closing remark is one more of an emotive one. We must remember that people are human beings and not machines that we're trying to repair. And that human-centered factor, which must be built into this holistic approach, is an incredibly important one in ensuring the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals and a reduction of the social gap that we have. Thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of the discussions.
Well, thank you very much, Vic, also for sort of giving us the picture of the future of work as it has been influenced, not least by COVID. And I suppose having accelerated some of the trends that we have already seen in the past, and your particularly your solidarity issue with those countries in the global south that are particularly affected by all of this. And I think it's a good segue to our next speaker, because you mentioned the impact on the environment, including some of the job gains that one could see as a result. And I like very much that you have actually put within the topic of this, the redesigning the contract between people and the planet, and no better to speak about it than Lydia Noronha, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Head of the Office here in New York for the United Nations Environmental Program. Lydia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Excellencies, good morning. And I would very much like to take forward what the Chair already spoke and what the Vice President spoke earlier, but also what the ILO spokesperson spoke just now, which is that this crisis provides us with an opportunity to take forward some serious considerations on the environmental crises that we face. And this speaks to the point that was made very recently by ILO, which is, if human beings are at the center of development, and if the human development journey needs to continue in the way we would like it to continue in the future we want in Agenda 2030, we need very much to ensure that the environment and ecosystem conditions that allow this and enable this will continue to be there for us, for the future generations. What we've seen now in the COVID crisis, but also what we see with the other planetary crisis, climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution, is that these may very well constrain the human development journey. So in order to be able to build back better, this is a great opportunity to take this forward. And as was said, there is no either or. These can go together. The sustainability transition is possible, ladies and gentlemen, because it speaks, the stimulus packages that we have can speak to the opportunities that we have right now to also address the crises. Let me give you some evidence of this from the studies that are put out there. One is investing in nature conservation. The IMF estimates multipliers of up to seven times of over 5 years in order to be able to take this forward. Spending on clean energy can have an impact on GDP that's about 2 to 7 times stronger than spending on non-eco-friendly energy. We just heard from the ILO that investments in renewable energies, building efficiency, green transport can yield 20 million jobs by 2030 compared to alternatives in a BAU situation. And the greening the public finance frameworks to ensure an integration of environment across policy and regulation design will be crucial to aligning national policymaking and growth trajectories with the Agenda 2030, Paris Agreement, and post-2020 biodiversity targets. So we really need to focus on this kind of integration to be able to take forward a mindset that allows us to address the crisis of today with the crises that may come in the future and which may impact human development. Ladies and gentlemen, we do believe in fact that there is very strong connections between our actions on climate change and sustainable development. There's been a lot of evidence on this. And one key aspect that we can look to, and the chair mentioned this, is the SDG 12 and looking at behavioral change and a change in mindsets. Estimates of studies suggest, for example, that circularity strategies to advance sustainable consumption and production in just 5 areas, cement, aluminium, steel, plastics, food, can eliminate almost half of the emissions from the production of goods. And that is really important to know because industry can be one major contributor to this change. A circularity approach is also highly effective in creating new jobs. And evidence from research in Latin America and the Caribbean region, for example, shows that adopting such an approach could yield a net total of 4.8 million new jobs in the region, with businesses engaged in practices for reuse, repair, remanufacturing products and parts, and recycling. The same for the circular economy in Africa could have positive employment effects, with the potential of creating 11 million new jobs by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, there is hope for us. There is hope for us to look at the SDG 12 in a strong light to see how we can make these changes. Take, for example, global food loss and waste, which generates about 8% of anthropogenic GHG emissions, equivalent to global road transport emissions. If you only were to look at ways in which we can reduce agriculture and food waste, and reduce what is avoidable, we need to extract nutrients and biogas rather than be allowed to build these in and degrade in landfills where it's a significant source of methane. Designing out waste along the whole value chain can serve to sequester carbon in the soil through regenerative agricultural practices. And the same with the transport sector. You know, for the lack of time, I won't go into the details, but the transport sector is another one that's important. The chair, as well as ILO, mentioned digital transformation. Digital transformations can enable, and communication technologies can enable up to 20% reduction of global CO2 emission reductions by 2030, if applied to 5 sectors: mobility, manufacturing, agriculture, energy, buildings. Digital technologies such as tracking and design can help reduce natural resources and other materials used in products by 90%. This can help reduce the impact of material extraction on nature and the environment, and it can reduce pollution and industrial emissions as well. UNEP is one of the co-champions of the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability, CODES, that is now working with a group of change makers from the public and private sectors to accelerate an inclusive and equitable digital planet for sustainability. We are currently co-drafting a flagship report on this, which is part of the UN Secretary General's Digital Cooperation Roadmap. Mr. Chair, I have a lot more to contribute, but I just want to say that this is a great opportunity to use the crisis to take forward our responses towards the planetary crises and build this new social contract, which is both inclusive and responsible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ligia, for pointing out the interconnection between food, circular economy, the whole issue of biodiversity, transport, the work, energy side. So we see there is a lot of integrated analysis there, and it's great to hear from you. Let me now turn to Mario Cimoli, to the ECLA, if you say the Latin American and Caribbean region. Mario is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. And we know that there have been a lot of studies done by ECLAC of late in relation to COVID. So it would be good to hear from you, Mario.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody. I bring the regards from Alicia that she couldn't stay here, but hello to everybody. And I want to take what you said before and what said Ambassador Sandoval. This is a very good, important, innovative process in ECOSOC. But I want to say something. I want to be my concentration in this presentation Of course, we need an integrated approach. Of course, we had enormous wishes about what we want in the new building back better, if you want. But we think, like ECLAT, that is very important when we speak about economic, society, and environment to understand which type of relationship, causal relationship between variables. For example, we want to growth and distribution after, or we want to grow with equal distribution at the same time. We want to have to understand or not that there is an enormous asymmetries between developed economies and more middle-income economies and underdeveloped ones. This causal relation is important. We have to make it a step further on that. And I want to give my presentation on this point clearly. And I want to say that Latin America faced this crisis in not a very good condition. The rate of growth was bad, and the productivity was very low. The informal sector continued to be high, and there arrived this impact, this enormous impact that affects the growth, and of course affect every part of the economy and society. It's increasing poverty, increasing inequality, and so on. What is the point here? What is the point? What is the situation where many of these countries stay there? First of all, I want to be very clear. The economy are growing now. Terms of trade are improving. Many of the economy in the Mexico and Central America has to be absorbed the growth rate by United States. That there is some situation that you look became something that is good, but the structural condition, what the ECLA said clear, remain the same. The engine of growth remain the same. Don't change it because you are absorbing rates of growth, you are increasing some employment, wages are decreasing, unemployment, informal activity are increasing again, and the total productivity of the region remain there. Stop it, not improve. When we speak about that we want more equality, when we speak about we want more welfare, better welfare conditions, that can be sustained by increasing in productivity, but not increasing in productivity only by one sector. What is happening now? Have to increase the productivity in the whole economy. Have to be the formal sector. If we have to afford informal one, and to increase the level of all productivity. Only in that way we can sustain in the long term productivity. And you know what is difficult? We have to be very honest on that. Many of the policymakers in the region, yes, they want to be sustainable in environmental policy, but they could do that because they are using the old energy, the old process, because they have the pressure of this informal activity. This is a strong condition we have to take account that is completely different from developed economy. That's happening in many of the economy of the region. And that's an important point. That is, which is the causal relation that we have to understand. First of all, we need to grow with equality. Inequality is an efficiency. That is very important to increase productivity. We need to improve welfare, but at the same time, that is important, we need to diffuse industrial policy, technological policy, create a better job. That is important. Without technology, that can be done. If we want to improve also the sustainable processes there, we can do that, but it's not the same condition that they have the United States in Europe, for example. If you take the case of Europe and the United States, Europe is putting there on the table 700 billions of euro, and the United States is paying 80 trillion, and they have an independent bank, and we don't have any independent bank. We don't have those resources, and there is an enormous asymmetry there. We can see this possible sustainable path, but taking clear into account this asymmetry and the relationship. This is the same pressure, because if we are wanting to do the circular economy in many of these economies, all of the people understand how important that is. But it's difficult to do that because the condition that we have at the beginning is completely asymmetrical and different. I want to put clear the debate of this asymmetric condition. Developed economy have the central bank that issues widely accepted reserve coverage. That you have enormous. We have on the other side balance of payment constraint. They have low borrowing costs. We have limited fiscal space and debts. They have broad market access. We have reduced market access. A strong representation they have in international institutions. We have very low and based representation. They have an history. And history of industrial policy and technological policy. Our history in industrial technological policy is not the same one. You have to understand when you're speaking about the sustainable, take the issue, put on the arena cooperation and intellectual property right. Cooperation in industrial policy and technology, that is very important. Because if we want to have welfare, if we want to have equality, we need also to have industrial apparatus in services and different that is growing. And this is requiring cooperative policy, because as then each country is looking for each policy. And this asymmetry has to be taken as part of this process. At the end of this thing, ECLAT has produced the recent document approved for the all countries in the region. And this document for sustainable economy said clearly, we need a composition of policy. Our pact has to be a pact that increases this possibility. At the end of the history, it is important to sustain investing. We, as United Nations, we can speak about every time, but if we don't have an increase in investment in Latin America, it's going to be difficult to do that. It's quite impossible to create a new job. Now, I say that in conclude. To have an integrated system is important, but you have to understand asymmetries and relation between variables. If United Nations don't have the capability to have in our brain, our model of development, that is not our model of development, we are going to jeopardize our narrative on development. That is my worry. And I want to conclude on that. I want to conclude when Giuseppe De Tomasi de Lampedusa and Leopardo said, everything needs to change to everything can stay the same. Don't forget that, because if we have a system say we have to change, we have to better, but we don't understand this causal relation, asymmetries, a causal variables that have to be there to move the model, to improve, to create richness also, is going to be difficult to do that. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much, Mario. I'm actually just reading the Leopard by Giuseppe di Lampedusa, because I think all of us have seen the film, but it's actually very important to read the book because it tells us a lot about power dynamics and revolutions and all kinds of things. So, and I think your remarks about the asymmetry are so important, and the paradoxes that we see. I think the one that probably epitomizes it the most is actually when it comes to the vaccine issue, which is the key to unlocking a lot. But we see on the vaccine issue the incredible inequity and sometimes really lack of solidarity as well. If I could just, yeah, thank you. If I could just ask colleagues who are wanting to participate in the interactive discussion, as you know, there is a chat. There's a link to inscribe in the interactive chat box that exists. So if you could just make sure that you are able to give us an indication of who would actually like to join the discussion, that would be extremely helpful. My next speaker is a household name, Professor Jose Antonio Ocampo, currently, of course, with a long past in the UN, but currently the chair of the 23rd session of the Committee for Development Policy. Over to you.
Yeah, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Chair, Excellency, distinguished participants. I will draw from the recent work of the Committee for Development Policy to reflect on some of the issues raised for discussion in today's panel. The committee made several recommendations for action to address the current crisis and its aftermath in its report to the Council, including measures in public health, finance, and effective debt relief, labor rights, and social protection. I will focus here on the issues most pertinent to the topic of today's session, but I want to underscore the importance of stepping up the immediate global response to ensure everyone everywhere has access to vaccines, diagnostics, and treatment, and to deliver an effective debt relief and financing for developing countries. Related to these issues, we are encouraged by recent progress on the issuance of new special drawing rights and endorse the proposal submitted to the WTO Council for trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights by India and South Africa, and supported by about 100 countries for a waiver from certain provisions of the TRIPS agreement for the prevention, containment, and treatment of COVID-19. The pandemic found governments and the multilateral system unprepared to deliver on the fundamental objectives of protecting people's lives and ensuring their economic safety. which exacerbated already severe inequalities and vulnerabilities. A central message from CDP's work this year is that the recovery from this unprecedented and multidimensional crisis should not lead to a return to pre-crisis development patterns, but to reframe the development paradigm towards equality, resilience, and environmental sustainability. In this context, the committee underscored the need to strengthen the link between productive structure and human development in the narrative and policy advice on meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. A country's production structure is the strongest determinant of its level of income, its income distribution, the quality of employment, the quality of the environment, the development of institutions, and its prospects for future growth and development. Countries need to actively promote the development of productive capacities in a way that will ensure flexibility and resilience in a rapidly changing global industrial and technological context. In their efforts to recover from the crisis, governments can steer the direction of economic growth, reshaping public-private relations in order to produce a dynamic economic system where innovations and investments are geared towards meeting people's needs and the protection of the planet. The financial benefits of publicly funded research and development should not be restricted to the firm engaging in the innovation. Where the financing and risk are shared with the public, so might the rewards be. Vaccines and access to education enabling technology are cases in point in the COVID-19 context. Policy space and support to the endeavors of countries to secure the kind of structural transformation that will enable them to meet the Sustainable Development Goals need to be at the core of multilateral priorities. The committee continues to support the reform of multilateral rules to establish a system that promotes social and economic stability, shared prosperity, and environmental sustainability. Excellencies, the CDP's comprehensive study on the impact of COVID-19 on the LDCs, conducted at the request of ECOSOC, showed that these countries have been hit extremely hard by the socioeconomic crisis. Insufficient fiscal space, pre-existing high debt levels, and dwindling private external financing have severely limited their fiscal response. With economic growth weakened and inequalities rising, the SDGs have become even more elusive. This calls for giving particular attention and priority to LDCs in the international response to COVID-19, including access to vaccines and strengthening public health systems, providing debt relief, and scaling up financial support. Countries that are graduating from the LDC category in these challenging times require specific support. We cannot talk about the inclusive, sustainable, and just global economy after COVID-19 without significantly increasing support for a sustainable and inclusive transformation of the economies of the LDCs. This includes building productive capacities in the health and education sectors, investing in digital infrastructure, developing science, technology, and innovation capabilities, designing and implementing green industrial policies, and pursuing the diversification of economic and export structures. The committee advocates that productive capacity should be the framework for the next program of action for least developed countries. Finally, regarding leveraging the role of ECOSOC, one of the issues presented for discussion in today's meeting, the committee recommended that the Council take stock of the lessons learned from the shortcomings of the multilateral and regional response to COVID-19. Responding to the need for an inclusive and networked multilateralism, ECOSOC should put in motion an open and transparent process to identify and implement the changes that will ensure that the system supports equitable, sustainable, and resilient development through structural transformation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, not just for analyzing the disproportionate impact that the crisis has had on LDCs, but also the importance of policy coherence and the combination of policies that come together and respond in a coherent way. Let me give the floor now to Julio Santaella, who is the vice chair of the 52nd session of the Statistical Commission, and data are obviously very, very important. Julio, over to you.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General Volker Turk, and my regards to Excellencies and everyone talking in this important dialogue. I think the topic today is very important about having a just, a resilient, strong economic recovery. And I think the 2030 agenda for sustainable development is very ambitious and basically tackles in an integrated way all the aspirations of the international community of trying to building this better world, better welfare, and let me remark, not leaving anyone behind. However, in order to achieve this agenda, these goals, we have to take decisions not in the darkness, but with a solid, clear evidence of where do we stand. We heard about, for instance, from Mario Cimoli about asymmetries. Well, he requested an analysis of causal relationships in order to find out where to integrate, what to integrate. We heard from the ILO about the new working arrangements, and we heard about UNEP about the importance of the environment. So these are very important topics, but we need to know where do we stand? How far are we from the goal that we have set for ourselves? Jose Antonio talked about the impact of COVID. So we need to measure the impact. In a way, so I'm advocating in favor of having data and statistics. And there's where the statistical community and the statistical commission comes in. The reality is that before the pandemic, we were not in very good shape in order to achieve the SDG agenda because many national statistical systems did not have the capacity to produce all the different indicators that were needed to understand and to monitor the progress towards the goals. And we're working very hard in the Commission to adopt standards, to adopt methodologies, to make sure to call for providing more data and more statistics in order to clear the picture and provide evidence in order to make well-informed decisions. And we were in this not that very good point of or situation when the pandemic struck. And of course, the pandemic brought a lot of new phenomena and new impacts, as Jose Antonio mentioned, that has been very difficult to overtake by the national statistical organizations or offices across the country. The pandemic of the national statistical offices has not been heterogeneous. Let me report that UNSD from DESA undertook a series of surveys of national statistical offices together with the World Bank with the objective of monitoring the impact of the pandemic on operations and the evolving needs that statistics have emerged in different countries. And there are very stark findings from these surveys. Globally, about 75% of national statistical offices had restrictions to undertake face-to-face data collection. So we were in a very poor shape, and suddenly we had the pandemic, and this limited the capacity to collect data that was very necessary to make policy decisions in order to achieve the SDG agenda. We already have another result that 73% of national statistical offices had a population and housing censuses that was planned in 2020 or 2021. This was before the pandemic hit. So The 2020 census round was going to take place just before the pandemic. Now, in the case of low and lower middle income group, 68% of these national statistical offices that were planning to have a census had to postpone it. So a very important source of information for policy making, which is a housing and population census, was not available in almost 2/3 of the countries. So we are basically have to take decisions in the dark. So this is very, very important. So we need to improve the capacity. Some of these asymmetries that Mario was talking about are reflected in the capacity of producing and collecting high quality statistics and data. So this environment, this situation about the lack of data is pretty much in the middle of the pandemic. So we're facing right now urgent demands for more data in terms of the impact on health, the impact on labor markets, the impact on the environment. And without high quality data, it's going to be very difficult to answer some of these questions and reply to these urgent demands for more data. The Statistical Commission have taken steps towards adapting its work and trying to provide additional replies and responses. Fortunately, the community was able to undertake the World Data Forum in a virtual format in October 2020, where we had a collection of good practices, how different agencies are responding to the demands of additional information, such as the Ghana Statistical Services leveraged and was able to rely on call detail records from telephone calls to assess the effectiveness of lockdowns. Chile's National Statistical Offices, the INE, had a statistical platform in order to see the contagion of COVID cases within the context of the socio-demographic data. In our country, Mexico, INEGI developed also a microsite in our website in order to merge and integrate statistical and geospatial information in order to inform the decisions regarding the pandemic on how to target specific programs such as vaccination and lockdowns. And of course, in the UK, the ONS is carrying out coronavirus infection survey in order to inform some of these decisions. Let me conclude making another comment, very important. In the recent session of the Commission, we adopted the system of environmental economic accounting, the ecosystem accounting. This is a very important methodology or framework in order to integrate the economy with the environment, because we're trying to precisely know the interlinkages between these two different domains and break the silos between the economy and the economic environmental impact of some of the economic decisions that we undertake. This SEA, System of Economic and Environmental Accounting, in the ecosystem version, can provide some of these examples of how the relationship between these things are happening. Let me just give a very brief example from the Netherlands, because this can lead to better management decisions. Land, for instance, is a very valuable resource for dairy farming, including the production of the Dutch Gouda cheese. And peatlands, which cover 8% of the country's area in the Netherlands, are often drained for farmland, causing large carbon emissions. You recall peats comprehend carbon collections. So the cost of these carbon emissions is usually absent in the national balance sheet when we rely on standard GDP measures. But the SEA and ecosystem accounting carbon accounts help to expose the true cost of the production of Gouda cheese. Researchers have used these carbon accounts to show that the profit from converting peatlands to farmlands was smaller than the monetized cost of carbon emissions from draining the peatlands. In essence, these carbon accounts help to expose and quantify the negative externality, and a law was proposed in the Netherlands to incentivize farmers to stop draining peatlands. So I want to conclude this example saying that we need data, and ECOSOC should be aware of these important initiatives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. As you know, the Secretary General within the system has issued last year an overarching data strategy precisely to combine data collection and analysis and transformation through a very innovative approach. Thank you very much. I've got two more speakers on the panel, but we have quite a lot of colleagues who would like to take the floor afterwards. So if I could just ask my two co-panelists if they could be as brief as possible, I would appreciate it. I'd first like to give the floor to Robert Powell, who is the Special Representative to the UN of the International Monetary Fund. Robert, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. As has been commented on already, especially by the ILO, the global recovery is progressing, but it is increasingly divergent across countries. It's powered by only a few countries with advanced vaccination efforts and successful containment, leaving poorer countries at greater risk of falling behind. So closing this gap, therefore, it's not just the right thing to do, it's key to ensuring an inclusive, sustainable and just long-term recovery for all countries. So let me just lay out briefly three priorities that the IMF sees as essential here. First, on vaccines. Right now, vaccine policy is the most important economic policy. The IMF staff have recently proposed a $50 billion plan to vaccinate 60% of the world's population by the middle of next year. We worked out this proposal with World Health Organization, World Bank, COVAX, and World Trade Organization. So it's very much a collaborative effort. Investing in ensuring everyone has rapid access to vaccines may well be the highest return public project that we have currently. If you consider faster progress in ending this crisis could add almost 9 trillion to the global GDP by 2025, thus enabling over $1 trillion of additional tax revenue, much of it going to those who we hope will provide grants for this approach. But this window of opportunity is closing fast. The longer it takes to speed up vaccine rollout, the harder it will be to achieve these gains. So we must do whatever it takes to ramp up production capacity, deploy a fair mechanism to redistribute vaccines from surplus to deficit countries. That's the immediate. Second priority, the SDGs. The COVID-19 pandemic is intensifying the vicious cycle of inequality and poverty. We all know this. That to break this pattern and give everyone a fair shot at prosperity, governments need to improve access to basic public services like healthcare and education, as well as making progress towards other targets associated with the SDGs. Now, in seeking to achieve the SDGs, many countries will need to pursue highly ambitious reform agendas that prioritize four things: fostering growth, which is a kind of reinforcing strategy to help strengthening the capacity to collect taxes, enhancing the efficiency of spending. We know much spending, especially in low-income countries, is often wasted or spent inefficiently, and catalyzing private investment, making sure the investment environment is attractive. A lot of these are governance issues. IMF analysis suggests that these reforms pursued in tandem could generate up to half the resources needed to make substantial progress towards the SDGs. It's going to be different in different countries, of course. Some countries, domestic revenue mobilization can get you most of the way there. In others, clearly significantly more aid is needed. If development partners also gradually increase the level of official development assistance from the current 0.3% of GNI to the UN target of 0.7%, many low-income countries Many low-income countries may well be in a position to meet their development objectives by 2030 or shortly thereafter. So the key point here is that exceptional action by all stakeholders is going to be necessary if we want to get back towards the SDGs. The third priority I wanted to flag is on climate. Climate, of course, has an impact on macroeconomic and financial stability and presents risks for the functioning of our economies. At the same time, the way in which we respond to this challenge also offers opportunities for growth and jobs, as our friend from the ILO was saying. So as the world starts to recover, we must accelerate the shift to a green economy. To do that, we believe that we need a robust price on carbon, which can send a critical market signal and advance climate-friendly investments. IMF analysis shows that steadily rising carbon prices and a green investment push could boost global GDP by about 0.7% a year in the next 15 years and create millions of new jobs. Now, in parallel, we also need to unlock the potential of private finance and align the global financial system with our climate objectives. That's why we're working with countries and with various international partners on data quality and disclosure, as well as on financial sector stress testing for climate-related issues. We need a green taxonomy and standardized reporting of climate-related financial risks to bring more certainty to investment decisions, improve understanding of the transition risks, and to help unlock trillions of dollars in private finance. But finally, we need to ensure a just transition. We need to support the parts of the economy and the people affected by the shift to low carbon growth. Governments need to use their fiscal capacity to create conditions for green transformation in areas that are currently relying on high carbon intensity activity. And of course, vulnerable people should be protected by retraining, reskilling, and also by appropriate social protection measures. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it really shows the importance of, as you say, of this combination of policy options that are then ensuring a coherence in the way that we operate. My last speaker of the panel is Renato Zerbini Rivera Leao, who is the chair of the 69th commission of the 69th session of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. I understand you will give the presentation in Spanish. Unfortunately, we don't have interpretation, but we can certainly make your presentation available in English afterwards.
Yes.
Es un placer de dar la palabra a Renato.
Muchas gracias, distinguido senhor embaixador Juan Sandoval Mendioleia, distinguido senhor Volker Turk, distinguidos e distinguidas colegas de mesa, senhoras e senhores. Em el âmbito de essa perspectiva tão especial, reconstruir mejoras e economias inclusivas, sostenibles e justas para a recuperação e desenhar o contrato entre as pessoas e o planeta, me gostaria de subrayar que o Comitê DESC aprovou declarações sobre o acesso universal e equitativo às vacinas para a COVID-19, a cooperação internacional e a propriedade intelectual. Dichas declaraciones esclarecen las principales obligaciones de los Estados partes del PDESC para el enfoque de la actual pandemia desde la óptica de los derechos humanos. Todo ser humano tiene derecho al más alto nivel posible de salud física y mental. Esto incluye el acceso a programas de inmunización contra enfermedades infecciosas. Asimismo, las personas tienen derecho a disfrutar de los beneficios del progreso científico, incluido el acceso a una vacuna segura y eficaz, desarrollada a partir de los mejores conocimientos científicos. Las pandemias, como la provocada por el coronavirus, es la ciencia la que debe guiar todos los conocimientos capaces de combatirlos. Los derechos protegidos por el pacto también sustentan los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, incluidas las preocupaciones relacionadas con el aumento de las desigualdades dentro de los países y entre ellos. Se trata de una cuestión que está en el centro del trabajo del comité de los ODS y de nuestros esfuerzos comunes para volver a construir mejoras y economías inclusivas, sostenibles y justas para la recuperación. Hacia essa mirada, o acesso às vacinas para todas as pessoas deve ser garantizado por los países até o máximo de seus recursos disponíveis e segundo as medidas necessárias para a vacinação universal e sem nenhuma discriminação. O dever de imunizar contra as principais enfermidades infecciosas e de prevenir e controlar as epidemias é uma obrigação prioritária como consequência do direito à saúde. Por lo tanto, em el actual escenário pandêmico, os países devem dar máxima prioridade à la disponibilidade de vacinas capazes de contribuir à la lucha contra a COVID-19. Este acesso é direito humano e deve ser facilitado por los países, especialmente quando são parte do Pacto Internacional de Direitos Econômicos, Sociais e Culturais. Estos países têm a obrigação de proporcionar informação fiável e transparente, basada em los melhores conhecimentos científicos, para que os cidadãos possam decidir se se vacunam ou não. Em este sentido, há que superar todos os obstáculos administrativos e burocráticos em favor de políticas públicas rápidas e eficazes para o acesso universal e equitativo às vacinas. O direito à saúde exige que os países hagam que as instalações, serviços e bens sanitários, incluídas as vacinas, sejam acessíveis, aceitáveis e de boa qualidade. As vacinas não só devem produzir-se e estar disponíveis, sino que, de acordo com o princípio de igualdade e não discriminação, devem ser acessíveis para todos. Razões como a religião, a nacionalidade, a orientação sexual, o gênero, a raça, a identidade étnica, a idade, a discapacidade, a situação migratória, a origem social, a pobreza ou qualquer outra razão não devem ser um impedimento. Por el contrário, deve garantizar-se a acessibilidade física às vacinas, especialmente para os grupos marginados e desfavorecidos, através de los canais estatais ou privados, especialmente mediante o fortalecimento da capacidade de entrega e distribuição das vacinas, também garantizando a gratuidade dessas vacinas. Importante destacar, finalmente, que muitas vacinas, a ponto de ser aprovadas, han sido desarrolladas por empresas privadas e podem estar sujeitas ao regime de propriedade intelectual. Estas empresas esperam obter benefícios e é justo que recebam uma compensação razoável por suas inversões. Sin embargo, a propriedade intelectual não é um direito humano, sino um produto social com uma função social. Em consequência, os países têm o dever de evitar que os regímenes de propriedade intelectual e de direito de patentes socavem o desfrute de los direitos humanos. Por lo tanto, também corresponde a las entidades empresariais abster-se de invocar direitos de propriedade intelectual que sejam incompatíveis com o direito humano de acesso a uma vacina segura e eficaz contra a COVID-19. Os países têm a obrigação de garantizar o acesso universal e equitativo às vacinas lo antes possível e por todos os meios necessários, incluso mediante a assistência e a cooperação internacionais. A priorização do acesso às vacinas deve ser apoiada por todos e deve organizar-se através de mecanismos transparentes e participativos que garantissem uma distribuição global basada em las necessidades médicas reais e em considerações científicas de saúde pública. Todo ser humano que lo desee pode e deve vacinar-se. Nadie deveria quedar atrás se decide vacinar-se. Nesse sentido, o comitê formulou recomendações a los estados sobre como lutar contra a pandemia de forma coerente com as obrigações derivadas do pacto, destacando o papel crucial de la solidaridad internacional y de la cooperación regional e internacional. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Muito obrigado, Renato. I think it was very important to hear particularly the whole, especially the recommendation that the committee has just issued and the non-discrimination aspects that you have highlighted. I'd like to open up now to the interactive dialogue. And since we have unfortunately failed to have a gender parity within the panel, I will ask our colleagues, our female colleagues to start. We have about 5 speakers. If I could all ask you to be brief so that everyone can take the floor. And I would like to start with Geraldine Fraser Molechetti, who is the chair of the Committee of Experts on Public Administration. It's a subsidiary body of the ECOSOC. Geraldine, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chairperson, and thanks to everyone for, I think, a very, very important contribution to quite a critical discussion right now on how we should tackle building back better towards an inclusive, sustainable, and just economies for recovering. I'd want to start out by almost affirming a point that has been made, and that was mentioned in the context of vaccine inequity that came from all, if most speakers, if not all. But in that context, as well as that of social protection, health systems, strengthening, it would be better not to consider recovery from the pandemic as something separate from the implementation of the 2030 agenda. Because as was stated earlier, and I'm simply emphasizing it, the 2030 agenda does indeed provide a roadmap to recover from the pandemic and build resilience to future shocks. I'd want to really also further affirm a point that was raised by Professor Jose Ocampo. And it's a point that has also come through, and I think Vic and others have raised it. We emphasize the need to reframe the development paradigm and to ensure that we do not return to a pre-COVID approach to development. And for us as the Committee of Experts on Public Administration, we saw this as quite central in the approach to SDG 16 and public administration, as well as looking at the whole issue of the rule of law, dealing with issues of peace and security. So we're saying that the opportunity, and I use this word opportunity guardedly, but the opportunity of the pandemic that led to a greater review and almost a common recognition of governments and public administration, we should ensure that we don't lose that moment. Sadly, however, due to the reality of vaccine inequities, the slow rollout of vaccines and more, there has been a dilemma around public trust. And we should ensure that we don't allow a trust crisis to be exacerbated, because that in turn could set us back and actually counter what has come through, which is, as was described, the reframing of the development paradigm, as well as the reframing the way in which governments and public service and public administration has been seen over the past 40 years. So as the United Nations system, as member states, as different levels of governments and governance, we cannot afford to go back. A second point that I want to raise quite quickly, and it's also a point that has come through in the discussion, is that there is a common tension in public administration between responding to urgent and important needs at the same time, attempting to deliver on longer term policy objectives. And in times of crisis, people tend to focus on the short term and forget about the long term. And we actually don't have the luxury of doing that. So achieving sustainable development and strengthening resilience require long-term perspective in policy making, together with institution building at all levels, based on effective government and governance for sustainable development, and a steadfast commitment to promoting peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. So as a committee, we had put what we presented as 8 ingredients for sound policy making. And this is strategic planning and foresight, regulatory impact and analysis, promotion of coherent policy making, the strengthening of national statistical systems, and we've heard the presentation earlier from the Statistical Commission as well, monitoring and evaluations systems, and the science and policy interface, and then risk management frameworks and data sharing. It's all issues that have been dealt with. I'd want to conclude with 2 big points. One, that policy making should address the multidimensional challenges to sustainable development in a holistic, a people-centered and planet-friendly manner. The capacity to analyze climate, land, energy, and water systems and incorporate such approaches to tackle complex problems. We have no choice around that. And such a approach is more critical for more effective long-term actions for climate change, mitigation, and adaptation, addressing biodiversity losses, managing water, and we know this was not on track even before COVID-19, and it is not on track at the moment, and we've got to take that forward in order to achieve SDG 6 on water and sanitation. And then, of course, energy. And energy is critical for development and to deal with inequalities as well. And we must deal with that in a sustainable way. We heard the input from the IMF on in dealing with that, and it wasn't in this context, but more broadly, we should ensure a just transition and in addressing planetary crises and COVID-19 challenges. So the conclusion then would be, and here I'd want to throw that out more or less, well, on behalf of the committee as well. We've heard the discussion around TRIPS and what must be done about that. But I think what we need is not just a waiver that's necessary for progress. What we need, and this point has been made, and I want to emphasize it, is to urgently vaccinate the world. That's quite critical, and we must understand that a waiver may be considered as something necessary in the short term. But the reality is, for real progress, we need to ensure that it's there for the long term, because of the reality that we are confronting now. And researchers need to work together for around competing vaccine development. So it's all about solidarity as well. So as chair of the committee of experts, I'd want to emphasize that SDG 16 is quite fundamental if we want to talk about attainment of the goals and dealing with this reality without going back, and doing so in an integrated manner, because it is a it is a cross-cutting SDG as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely, and it's interesting also in the context of the common agenda discussions, public administration, SDG 16 is really crucial because it goes to the heart of governance and the social contract. I just want to do a very quick time check. We have got 4 more who would like to take the floor, and we have about 10 minutes, and we need to do a quick wrap up at the end. So if I could ask colleagues to be as brief and precise as possible, we would really appreciate it. My next speaker is Maria Gutierrez, who is a counselor in the Permanent Mission of Nicaragua. Over to you.
Hello, can you please confirm you can hear me and see me?
Perfecto.
Okay, hi. Hello. We appreciate the convening of these virtual conversations as part of the preparatory process for the ECOSOC integration segment, during which we will be discussing policy and program options to continue facing and recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. To implement the Decade of Action, there is a clear need for a new social contract that simultaneously addresses the COVID-19 pandemic and those to come. It requires rekindling hope and confidence in the future. One way to achieve this is for the international community to commit to building a net zero emission society by 2050. This will give us an international development goal that would allow us to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, which sadly could be worse than COVID-19. It is important to remember that cooperation to address COVID-19 should not replace the means of implementation of the 2030 Agenda, in particular, those aimed at the most pressing goal, which is poverty eradication. In addition to official development assistance and climate finance, developing countries need urgent and disbursable emergency financing. We urge the international community to significantly increase investment in public health to avoid such health emergencies in the future. At the international level, 2 concrete immediate actions can be taken. The first one is to follow Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call for countries that impose unilateral coercive measures to immediately cease and desist from their illegal actions that affect more than 30 countries with more than 2 billion people, and that in times of pandemic hinder universally access to vaccines and treatments developed to confront COVID-19 on equitable and affordable terms. These legal sanctions severely affect national economies, becoming a crime against humanity. The second measure is debt cancellation for developing countries, at least in the period 2020-2024. It is better for everyone that the debt be forgiven during these 4 years as part of the solution, avoiding prolonged chain of sovereign debt defaults as part of the problem. To recover from this pandemic, it is essential to transform the current unjust economic order, product of the global capitalism model, into one that allows us to respond to the ever-increasing and more frequent crises by strengthening multilateralism, solidarity, and cooperation, providing the financial resources to ensure access and equitable distribution of vaccines to all the people in the world, as well as creating capacities to guarantee its production and distribution in developing countries, thus effectively responding to the pandemic and recovering to create a better world without poverty and inequality, with social justice and in harmony with Mother Earth. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Muchas gracias. I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Kitty Sweep, Permanent Representative of Suriname and Chair of the UN Forum on Forests, which is another subsidiary body of ECOSOC.
Yes, thank you so much for being part of these important dialogues. Yes, as the chair of the Forum on Forest, I'd like to offer also some of the outcomes that came from our last sessions, the 16th session that was held in April. And just to quickly mention a couple of main points, to make on recovery strategies and policies, we need to make sure that these are transformative and take into account the integrated nature of the Sustainable Development Goals and provide relief in the short term while creating resilience and promoting sustainability in the long run. The COVID global pandemic has been a stark reminder that protection, conservation, and restoration of nature, in particular forest, is essential for preventing future infectious and zoonotic diseases. Forests have the potential to offset many of the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and other global challenges. Also, the interlinked and mutually reinforcing threats of climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, forest fires, desertification, land degradation, and pollution, and other disasters continue to threaten the life of people and ecological integrity of the planet. The UN Strategic Plan for Forest 2030 and its 6 global forest goals provide a framework of forest-based actions for the synergetic implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and also, of course, the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement, as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity and its important outcome on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Further, to strengthen institutional policy and human resources capacity to harness the potential of data and digital technologies towards recovery from COVID-19 and accelerating progress towards the SDGs during the decade of action and delivery for sustainable development. A couple of points here. The COVID-19 crisis has negatively impacted on the delivery of sustainable forest management, including forest governance and forest financing availability, and the livelihoods of forest-dependent people, creating potential setbacks in efforts to deliver on the strategic plan for forests and its goals. Critically important is, of course, the science and technology, as well as adequate financial resources and increased capacity building, data collection and analysis in addressing the negative impacts of COVID-19. Strengthening intersectoral consultation, cross-sectoral collaboration, and stakeholder engagement are also important steps to ensure a sustainable and integrated land use planning. Appropriate policy and fiscal frameworks are also needed to facilitate and promote private sector involvement in sustainable supply chains. And so what we take away from this all is indeed, as is mentioned by others before, the time to act is now. Upcoming international conferences as concerns forest, including the high-level political forum in July of 2021, the Food Systems Summit and the high-level dialogue on energy, as well as the COP15 of the Convention of Biological Diversity and the COP26 on climate change. These are all opportunities to help shape an inclusive and sustainable future for all. Not only, as has been pointed out by Mario, in the fashion that we are used to, but through actually changing systems to be able to truly bring about attaining the goals we have set for 2030 and beyond. With respect to forests, this chance to bring change exists especially in the upcoming COP26 climate change conference, where parties need to finalize in practical and concrete terms how to operationalize targeted carbon sequestration, carbon credits, etc. And in conclusion, in thinking about that we have leaving no one behind, in many areas of challenges, we see that short-term or restricted targets, quick gains, are ultimately detrimental, whether it be in migration, in the COVID-19 rollout. Short-term and restricted targets, with that, no one is out of the woods. So I would say a variation of that, to leave one behind is ultimately to leave all behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to Ricardo Mena, who is the director of the UN Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Volker. I feel quite pleased to be the only male candidate on the list of speakers. But of course, we have to look for good gender balance. So, Excellencies and colleagues, first I want to thank you all the panelists for the good presentations. I wanted to refer to the fact that the pandemic has demonstrated that risk is increasingly systemic and complex, and that hazards can trigger cascading impacts across the SDGs. So when considering potential synergies and trade-offs between recovery and development pathways, it's essential to assess how policy and investment decisions would create or reduce risk. Therefore, the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is essential to build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic towards inclusive, sustainable, and just economies and societies. This requires the understanding of the interrelations between patterns of risk across multiple dimensions and scales. UNDRR, together with its partners, are supporting national and local governments to collect multi-hazard disaster risk and loss data and to analyze and apply this information in decision-making. The Global Risk Assessment Framework that UNDRR is developing and piloting in a few countries will help government get to grips with systemic risk and its implications for achieving the SDGs. The combination of COVID-19, climate and biodiversity crisis necessitates a transformation of the way we approach disaster risk. This was already alluded to by Robert Powell from IMF in his intervention. The shift outlined in the Sendai framework from reactive approaches focusing on individual hazards to proactive planning and the management of multi-hazard risk within development pathways cannot wait any longer. The development of multi-hazard national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, including biological hazards and risks, as per the Sendai Framework Global Target E, is imperative in this regard. This must be supported, of course, by adequate and dedicated financing and appropriate risk reduction laws, regulations, and standards. In other words, stronger risk governance. To accelerate action towards the 2030 agenda, the Sendai Framework and the Paris Agreement, there is a need also for stronger coherence and approach to supporting particularly LDCs and seeds to capitalize on synergies, make more efficient and effective use of resources, and ensure that climate and development policies reduce rather than create new risks. The multi-stakeholder partnerships and initiatives are very important tools for sharing knowledge, best practices, and lessons learned, including from COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to just highlight 3 initiatives led by UNDRR very briefly. One relates to the International Recovery Platform, which supports countries to build back better in recovery. The IRP, as we know it, has developed a series of products to support countries and communities with planning for recovery. These include a compendium of 21 tools and guidelines for pandemic recovery, a policy brief, and a set of guiding action-oriented principles and practical cases for COVID-19 recovery. Secondly, the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative, which provides a variety of tools, including a clear roadmap to urban resilience for cities, which are at the front line of responding to the COVID emergency and its recovery. Finally, launched by the government of India with support from UNDRR in 2019, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure promotes the resilience of infrastructure to climate and disaster risk. These approaches and initiatives contribute towards a sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic to get us back on track for the decade of action. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, folks.
Well, thank you very much, Ricardo. And my last speaker is Choi Kim, who's a Senior Economic Affairs Officer in UNEP. Over to you, Choi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to step in on behalf of Alicia, a colleague of mine from New York office, UNEP, who actually spoke at the very beginning. She spoke a lot about the opportunities the recovery can offer to countries, but it is true that I very much relate to what Mario and other colleagues mentioned about the specific situations that developing countries are facing. And our biggest concern is while we actually talk a lot about the possible opportunities, we may not actually able to provide the enabling environment for developing countries not to miss the opportunity to finance and support for three planetary crises, which is climate change, pollution, and biodiversity and nature. And I think that, as also our colleague from IMF mentioned about the fiscal space limited for many developing countries, it is very urgent and it is very real issue for many countries to address the debt crisis. And I think that it was actually mentioned also by the Nicaragua. If we don't actually address the debt crisis and situations in developing countries, it is very unlikely that they would actually be able to finance for three planetary crises. So we support and propose the debt crisis and addressing the debt issues, including a debt swap for nature and climate change. This can also provide opportunities for countries to finance for climate and nature, but also at the same time to address the debt issues in many countries. So UNEP, together with our partners, are ready and work and support countries on the issue of debt swaps for nature and climate change to make sure that countries can grasp the opportunities that recovery can offer to address sustainability while recovering fair and then a green economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think these are very important interlinkages indeed that you have just highlighted, Jim. If I could just, first of all, thank very much the panelists, but also all of those who have participated in the interactive dialogue. I mean, if I were to look at some common threads coming out of this discussion, what is very clear is that it shows the interdependence of each and every issue, which COVID has only accentuated and amplified in so many ways. And as we emerge from the crisis, I think, and go into a global recovery, we also realize that it is at the moment very uneven, but it is precisely because of our role within the UN, both intergovernmental processes, but also within the UN system, to ensure that this unevenness gets urgently addressed in different ways. And this really starts with the analysis, an integrated, holistic analysis of the disproportionate impact that the crisis has had on, in particular, countries in the global south, LDCs, but also middle-income countries, and we have heard it from some of you, and that we need to address this head-on, but also the many other issues that are related to it, the gender dimension, the fact that we have a debt crisis as well as it comes. We have seen some very concrete proposals, obviously, when it comes to vaccine equity, and you've certainly heard the Secretary General very often talk about it. And I know that IMF, WHO, WTO have just come together. They issued something earlier this week about precisely a plan forward. We hope also in the context of G7, G20, that is really seen as one of the keys to unlock a lot of what we are facing today. But then the realignment with the SDGs, how much it is a blueprint that hangs together, that needs to be implemented, that actually offers the integrated view that we have all been looking for. We just need to make sure that holistic integration of the different policy streams actually gets then offered in terms of a combination of policy options that lead to what you all have been talking about, fair, just, and green recovery, linking it obviously very much with climate action, with biodiversity, with the environmental impact that we have, but at the same time seeing the opportunity in the job creation, in the wealth creation that can, if we do it well, and with the right combination of policies, actually get us where we need to get in terms of progressing and in terms of the global recovery. So I'm very apologetic that we haven't managed the time as much as we would have liked to, and in particular to the Vice President of ECOSOC, Querido Juan. What I wasn't able to deliver is the time, but I think we at least got a very rich discussion going, and hopefully will then feed into the event in July. Over to you.
Thank you very much. On the contrary, I apologize for that we didn't have the chance of giving a second round to all the participants to give a second message, but I think that you did a fantastic wrap up. You really catch, I was checking my notes, and you really got everything and on your remarks. So the distinguished panelists, delegates, participants, I would like, first of all, to thank you for your presence, to thank our lead entity, ILO, and especially to our moderator, Volker Turk, for your participation. It was amazing. The way that you just participated. I won't hide that what we are doing here is that the right hand talks to the left hand. And normally many of you, because of the different bodies, the subsidiary bodies that you are heading or how you are representing, you don't mix with the others. And this is what we really need. We need to hear each other and to see how we can better integrate the policies to face the pandemic and to recover better. There was excellent contributions today. Thank you. We cannot do justice to summarize all of them. We will try to compile the key policy options for integrated solutions that have been mentioned to build back better towards inclusive, sustainable, and just economies. This will inform the deliberation at the integration segment. Then I will be presenting. And basically, I would like to underscore the extraordinarily urgent, essential, sine qua non need of vaccinate everybody around the world. There is no possible recovery without vaccines for everybody, leaving no one behind. The importance of protecting the jobs all over the world and continue doing so, and also reframing, as it was very interesting, the development paradigm in general. As Geraldine Fraser just mentioned, it was a very interesting approach, how we must try to improve what we and trying to change the structures. That will be terrible if we just come back to all what was wrong. And this sustainable, the sustainability that must be present in every part of the productive life of the world, the consumption, the production, and make it more sustainable, thinking about energy. Of course, all those elements must be duly considered. The message of the IMF about having a strong program for vaccinated everybody by the half of the next year, I think that's very good news for everybody. We really hope that this can be achievable. And of course, and thank you very much to Julio Santaella, statistics are essential. Otherwise, we will know what we are really facing. Maybe this could be the time of having better numbers and better knowing our own situations. With that, dear panelists, dear Volker, I have nothing else to say but to thank you for this very rich session, this very rich exercise. We are doing things differently. This space is ECOSOC. Even if it's an informal meeting, we are doing things differently. And that's one of the main messages that I will keep from today. Let's recover better. Let's try to do not falling in, don't get loose into a bureaucracy, into the silos. Let's come out and talk to each other. And that's exactly what we did today. So I am very pleased. I thank you very much all for your presence this morning. I invite you to the third dialogue. That our last integration dialogue will be next week, next Thursday. It will be on human well-being and capabilities, building back more resilient, healthy, equitable, and sustainable societies. I think that we talk, in fact, a lot about that today. But we will also address the major dimensions of the new social contract as it was proposed by the Secretary General. We invite you all next week to continue our reflections and to continue working together in this integrated manner. Thank you so much. Very good morning. Have a wonderful week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and goodbye to all.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Hasta luego. Muchas gracias a
Goodbye.
todos.